And the second thing that we see in this passage is that Jesus values motives more than motivation. But this is actually the most frightening thing about this letter, because when we analyze this letter to Sardis, what we don't see is like some sort of error. Right? There's no theological discourse about how they've gone in this direction, they followed this prophetess, like we saw last week, or they've made this mistake and they've swallowed this thing that they really should have rejected, like we saw 2 weeks ago with Pergamum, with the Nicolaitans and the sexual sins. And so, but we don't see that with Sardis. There's no falsehood that's being preached here. They've just missed it. And that's frightening. What we see in this church is a church that, honestly, humanly speaking, has a good reputation. I know your works. You have the reputation of being alive. Who would give them that reputation? Not God, obviously, because this is God speaking. It's humans that gave them this reputation, that they were alive. This church is probably growing. This church is well known as being a dynamic, busy church, doing deeds out there in society. I know your works. That looks like a good thing. And yet Jesus says, but you are dead. Wake up. Strengthen what remains and is about to die, for I have not found your works complete in the sight of my God. So on the outside, you look great, but there's something missing in what you're doing. They're not complete. Everybody thinks you're great. Everybody says, oh, this is what a church is supposed to be. But something's missing. You're asleep. You've missed the true reality of your purpose. Wake up. And it's not that doing works is bad. That's not what I'm saying. I know hopefully nobody took that as what I was saying. The works last week were commended. Why? Because they were done out of love and faith and service. There's no commendation here. And so we have to infer from that they are not being done out of love and faith and service. They're being done to prop themselves up, to make themselves look good, and that's exactly what they get. If you desire the praise of men, that's all you're going to get in the end. And so ultimately what we see is a church here that's not worshiping from the heart. They're not together because their heart is in the right place. It's just an empty religion. And this is what God says through the prophet Hosea when he brings his lawsuit. For I desire steadfast love and not sacrifice, the knowledge of God rather than burnt offerings. You do all of your religious ceremonies. That's great. But you've missed the fact that I want your heart. I want your heart to be in it. This isn't a legal contract only. I want the relationship. I don't care if you have all of the religious trappings. If you have no love for me, what difference does it make? What's the point? What's the good of it? See, God cares about what's going on in the heart. He cares about the motive. He cares about the motive behind what you're doing. So think about it, how it would work in your marriage. Like if your spouse comes to you and says, I don't really know what I think about you. Well, this is a bad start. But I'll do the things that keep peace between us, even though I haven't really decided what I think about you yet. So if you want me to cook, I'll cook because that just keeps the peace. If you want me to do the laundry, I'll do the laundry because that keeps the peace. But just keep in mind, I don't know if I love you. To be honest, I don't even know if I respect you. Like, is your relationship going to last in that scenario? I don't think so. Right? So we go to God and we say, I'll do all the things that you asked me to do, but I'm not sure that I really love you. I mean, quite honestly, most of these things I do for me anyway, so that's kind of evidence that I don't really respect you. I don't fear you. That's not enough to keep this relationship going. There's no heart in it. It's just a contract at that point. The inner desire is necessary. And what Jesus is saying to this church is, you've got a lot of deeds, but you don't have any inner passion. And because you don't have any inner passion, you're like a kite without any wind. I can pull that kite along behind me. I run down the street. I've done this before. Maybe you have too. You run down the street trying to get that kite up, and there's no wind that day. But as long as you're running, man, that thing's flopping around, and it's like, yeah, it's trying to get up in the air, and you're like, yeah, this is going to work, this is going to work, this is going to work. And as soon as you stop running because you're exhausted, the kite falls to the ground, right? And this is exactly what it is. You have no passion. There's no relationship in all of your deeds. There's no wind bearing the weight of it. And the outer deeds are there. You're running. But there's nothing to keep the kite aloft. And it eventually crashes to the earth. Spiritually speaking, if you have a love affair with God, that's enough to keep the kite aloft of your spiritual life. The love affair with God is what's going to keep it going. Now, when you run down, you don't even have to run. You just throw the kite up in the air when it's a windy day, and the kite just goes, right? And then you're like, do I have enough string? Now you can move around. You got one of those trick kites. I've always wanted one of those. I never had one. My parents never sprung for that. But you can pull the string, and it can go one direction. You can do loop-to-loops and all those kinds of things. That look really cool, right? But what is it all dependent on? It's dependent on the love affair. It's dependent on the wind. Filling it up. See, the inner desire is the fountain that should be driving the outer deeds. And if we're only doing the outer deeds without the inner fountain, well, then we get exhausted and eventually we're going to fall apart. Look, please understand, we're not talking about hypocrites here in this church. I think these people actually did understand what Christ did for them, but then they forgot. These are people that have basically fallen asleep. They stopped pursuing Christ. They started pursuing all of the other things in life. They got their eyes down low again, started focusing on their feet. They're dead. They have no air to hold them up. So he says, wake up, strengthen what remains and is about to die, for I have not found your works complete. The Greek there for wake up is genu gregoron. Sometimes Greek's just fun to say. Strictly translated, it means become watchful. Become watchful. Be on the alert. The NASB says that. Be constantly alert. And these are terms that you would use if you were a sentry out on guard duty. In a dangerous place, you want to be on alert. It's when we feel safe that we let our guard down. Oh, nothing's going to happen. Nothing happened last night. Nothing happened the night before that. In fact, we've gone on months and months of nothing happening. It's hard to stay alert when that's the case. But you want to be alert because the danger is imminent. So this is a call to arms ultimately. Not to works, but it is a call to action. And so you see, if you don't believe that the threat is real, then you're going to fail at being constantly alert. Just didn't really sleep all that well last night. Yeah, I don't think I really need to be focused in on Jesus today. Nothing ever happens anyways. Nobody ever asks me a question that I need to know the answer to. Well, sometimes it happens and you're not ready for it. And you're like, I know because you call me first. Pastor, somebody asked me a question I don't have the answer to. What's the answer? What? You weren't on the alert? You should have been in the Word. You should be studying yourself. Not studying yourself. You guys do that too much. Studying the Word yourself. Wake up. If you will not wake up, verse 3, I will come like a thief. There's the cutting off. And you will not know what hour I will come against you. Look, Jesus isn't simply talking to individual Christians. It'd be great if we just point the finger at Joe. Sorry, Joe. If we could just point the finger and say, oh, it's all his fault. But that's not, Jesus is talking to a group of Christians. He's talking about the church as a whole, the organization as a whole. And he's saying, look, the corporate body, the church is falling asleep. This isn't good. The church needs to wake up. We need to ask, this is what we need to ask ourselves. Is it possible that our church could be sound in its teaching? I hope that it is. That's my endeavor. Sound in its teaching. We could have a great reputation in our community. They know us for our works. We have the reputation for being a live church, but in fact, we're spiritually dead. Would we know? The answer to the question is that possible? Is absolutely, it's possible. In fact, I think all churches are in danger of falling asleep on the job. So we got to find ways to keep our attention bright, to keep ourselves focused so that we are aware of the task at hand, so that we're ready for the task at hand. See, the only churches who are not asleep are the churches that recognize that the danger is real for them. I need to keep my first love. That if my eyes are down, then I'm going to start focusing on myself and my own problems, and I'm not going to focus in on Jesus, and I forget about my first love, and then I've forgotten, I've fallen asleep. I need to maintain my witness. I need to focus on being the hands of Jesus in the community. Why? Because he's coming back. That's what it says. That's what the verse says. Like, I'm going to return. I'm going to return like a thief. You're not going to know when it's going to happen. If you're not ready, you're going to be taken unawares. And I'm going to take from you what you thought you valued. But you're not proving that you actually value it, which is why I'm going to take it. If you aren't focused and alert and focused on me, well, I mean, basically, this is what we saw. This is like a reprise of the warning to the church of Ephesus, right? It's just that Sardis seems to be a little bit further along, right? You've lost your first love. Well, now you're so far along in losing your first love, you've fallen asleep. You're not ready for anything. You're gone. So in order to stay passionate, we have to keep that. We have to remember all of those things that we first received. That's what he told to the church in Ephesus. But we have to find our ways to remind ourselves that we were put here originally to do something very specific. The church has a mission. We're going to do something. It's great. I love church plants because they're so passionate. It's like, we're going to do something in this community. It's going to be amazing. You can't wait until we get involved and we start, doing what God has us to do in this community. It's all fire for a church plant, right? But over the years, church plants, all of them, become institutions. And they lose some of that fire. Some of them lose all of that fire. And over time, they start serving themselves instead of serving God, instead of serving their community. You forget what you built for. That's how you get there. So the book of Revelation says to these churches, hey, you're all lampstands. Understand that a lampstand is not the lamp. The lampstand doesn't produce any light. The lampstand holds up the light. Our mission in this community is to hold up the light of Jesus Christ. We are the lampstand holding up the light. That's our job. If we fail at doing our job, what's the point of us even existing as a lampstand? That's why it's a threat to so many of these churches. I'll remove your lampstand. If you're not going to hold me up anyways, then there's no purpose for you. So Littleton is supposed to look at us and say, oh, that's what Jesus is like? Oh, isn't he beautiful? Do they look at us and say that? If we aren't having that effect, then maybe we're asleep. See, we can be asleep without even knowing it. In fact, some churches are asleep for years without knowing it before they become aware of the fact that they're actually asleep.